Ever wonder what goes on behind the scenes of a cult classic sci-fi film that predicted the future of CGI and featured a weapon that had never been tested? From actors wearing wigs due to illness, to arcade games that were never released despite being promised in the credits, to hitchhikers who became Star Trek villains, The Last Starfighter is packed with bizarre production secrets and surprising connections. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Last Starfighter. Fact 1. The director was Michael Myers. First, before Nick Castle became the director of The Last Starfighter, he had one of the most iconic roles in horror movie history, even though most people never saw his face. In 1978, Castle played Michael Myers, the silent masked killer in John Carpenter's Halloween, and he got paid just $25 a day for the job. This was before he ever sat in the director's chair, and it happened almost by accident when he was visiting his old film school friend John Carpenter on set. Castle and Carpenter had been classmates at the University of Southern California, where they studied film together, so when Carpenter was shooting Halloween, Castle just wanted to hang around and watch his friend work. Carpenter ended up offering him the role of Michael Myers on the spot, probably because the character never speaks and wears a mask the entire time, so it seemed like something anyone could do. But Castle brought something special to the role through his body language and movements, creating that eerie, unsettling presence that made Michael Myers so terrifying, including that famous head tilt that became part of the character's signature look. What makes this connection to The Last Starfighter even more interesting is that Castle used his experience working with Carpenter on Halloween and later co-writing Escape from New York as his film school for directing. He said those collaborations were the only things that really prepared him for taking on the complicated work of directing The Last Starfighter, which required managing groundbreaking computer-generated effects and a tight 38-day shooting schedule. Castle went from being paid less than $30 a day to wear a mask and stalk teenagers to directing a major science fiction film with cutting-edge technology, all within just 6 years. After The Last Starfighter, he continued directing films like The Boy Who Could Fly, Dennis the Menace, and Major Payne, but he also came full circle in 2018 when he returned to play Michael Myers again in the Halloween reboot, 40 years after putting on the mask for the first time. Fact 2. Lance Guest wore a wig mid-production. If you watch The Last Starfighter closely, you might notice something strange about Alex's appearance in certain scenes, especially when his beta unit duplicate is running around the trailer park having a great time. The hair looks different, almost burnt or artificial, and the actor's face appears unusually pale in these moments. There's actually a fascinating behind-the-scenes reason for this visual inconsistency that reveals just how unpredictable film production can be. When the movie wrapped its initial filming in 1984, lead actor Lance Guest decided to get a haircut and cut his hair quite short. This wouldn't normally be a problem, except that director Nick Castle soon realized he needed to shoot additional scenes. Test audiences had responded extremely positively to the Beta Alex character, the android duplicate that takes Alex's place on Earth, while the real Alex is off fighting in space. The audiences loved the comic relief these scenes provided, and Castle felt they added more originality and humor to what could have been a straightforward boy goes to space adventure story. Unfortunately, when it came time to film these extra beta unit scenes, Lance Guest not only had short hair that looked completely different from the rest of the movie, but he had also contracted an illness during this period. The production team had to find a quick solution to maintain continuity with the earlier footage. Their answer was to put Guest in a wig that would match his original hairstyle from the main shoot, and they applied heavy makeup to his face to help mask his illness and maintain some consistency with his earlier appearance. Despite their best efforts, the wig and makeup don't quite match the natural look from the original filming. If you know what to look for, you can spot the difference pretty clearly in scenes where Beta Alex is riding in a truck and laughing hysterically, or when he first meets Centauri and climbs into the star car. The hair has an almost synthetic quality to it, and his complexion looks noticeably different. It's one of those production quirks that reminds us how many challenges filmmakers face even when trying to add scenes that will improve the final product. Fact 3. Robert Preston's final film role. When Robert Preston signed on to play Centauri in The Last Starfighter, the filmmakers weren't just casting an actor, they were bringing in a Hollywood legend for one final performance. The character of Centauri, described as a lovable intergalactic conman who recruits young Alex Rogan to become a starfighter, was specifically written with Preston in mind as a deliberate nod to his most famous role as Professor Harold Hill in the 1962 classic The Music Man. Just like Harold Hill was a charming traveling salesman who talked his way into people's hearts, Centauri is a smooth-talking alien entrepreneur who convinces a trailer park kid that he's destined for greatness among the stars. Preston brought that same magnetic charisma and showmanship to the role, delivering lines with theatrical flair and making Centauri one of the most memorable characters in the film. His performance captured the perfect balance of humor, charm, and just enough shadiness to make you wonder if Centauri is truly looking out for Alex or just trying to make a quick buck. The parallel between the two characters wasn't lost on audiences who recognized Preston's signature style of playing lovable rogues with big personalities and even bigger promises. What makes this casting even more poignant is that The Last Starfighter became Robert Preston's final appearance in a theatrical film. He passed away in 1987, just 3 years after the movie's release, making his performance as Centauri a bittersweet farewell to cinema. Preston had enjoyed a long and successful career on both stage and screen, but it's fitting that his last major film role allowed him to revisit the kind of fast-talking, larger-than-life character that made him famous in the first place. The film essentially gave Preston one last chance to do what he did best: charm an audience while playing a character who's always got one more trick up his sleeve. Fact 4. A Cray supercomputer rendered the CGI. When The Last Starfighter hit theaters in 1984, audiences were witnessing something truly revolutionary, but most people had no idea just how expensive and complicated it was to create those groundbreaking space battle scenes. The film's visual effects were rendered using a Cray XMP supercomputer, which was literally one of the most powerful computers in the entire world at that time. This wasn't just some fancy desktop machine sitting in an office somewhere. This was a massive piece of technology that required serious resources just to keep running. The electricity bill alone for operating the Cray XMP came to approximately $12,000 per month, and that was just to power the thing. On top of that, the supercomputer needed constant maintenance and technical support, which added another $50,000 to the monthly costs. To put this in perspective, that's over $60,000 every single month just to have access to the computing power needed to create the film's special effects. The company responsible for creating the visual effects was called Digital Productions, and they had leased this Cray supercomputer specifically because they knew traditional special effects using physical models wouldn't achieve the look they wanted for the film. The Cray XMP was fronted by a VAX 11/780 computer and was used to produce nearly 300 shots that totaled about 25 minutes of screen time. Each frame of animation that contained computer graphics had an average of 250,000 polygons, and the resolution was an impressive 3,000 by 5,000 pixels with 36-bit color depth. The rendering process was incredibly slow by today's standards, taking an average of 120 seconds to render a single frame of the film. Despite the enormous cost, Digital Productions estimated that using computer animation required only about half the time and somewhere between 1/3 to 1/2 the cost of traditional special effects methods using miniatures and physical models. The gamble on this expensive technology helped make The Last Starfighter one of cinema's earliest films to extensively use computer-generated imagery, paving the way for the visual effects revolution that would transform Hollywood in the decades to come. Fact 5. Each CGI frame had 250,000 polygons. When The Last Starfighter hit theaters in 1984, audiences were witnessing something truly groundbreaking in visual effects technology, even if they didn't fully realize it at the time. Every single frame of computer-generated imagery in the film contained an average of 250,000 polygons, which was an absolutely staggering number for the era. To put this in perspective, each frame was rendered at a resolution of 3000 by 5000 pixels with 36-bit color depth, creating images that were far more detailed and complex than anything moviegoers had seen before in computer graphics. The production company Digital Productions used their Cray XMP supercomputer to create 27 minutes of CGI effects for the film, and at the time, this was considered an enormous amount of computer-generated content for a single movie. The sheer scale of the rendering work was unprecedented, with 300 scenes in the film containing computer graphics that had to be painstakingly processed, frame by frame. The most complicated sequence in the entire film was a shot of the Gunstar flight bay filled with multiple spacecraft, which contained a mind-boggling 4 million polygons in a single scene, making it the most complex computer-generated sequence that had been created up to that point in cinema history. What makes these numbers even more impressive is understanding how primitive the technology was compared to modern standards. Each frame took an average of 120 seconds to render, meaning that creating just 1 second of footage could take hours of processing time on what was then one of the most powerful computers in the world. The artists and technicians at Digital Productions were essentially inventing the process as they went along, developing new software and techniques to handle the massive computational demands. For comparison, a modern video game from 2014 like Infamous Second Son regularly drives 11 million polygons in real-time gameplay, but in 1984, achieving even a fraction of that in pre-rendered film footage was considered a technological miracle that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in visual effects. Fact 6. The arcade game was never released. If you watch The Last Starfighter all the way to the end credits, you'll see a promise that reads, "Video game available from Atari Incorporated." The only problem is that this arcade game never actually made it to store shelves, despite being nearly finished when the project was suddenly canceled. This broken promise has become one of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes stories in 1980s gaming history. Atari had big plans for the Last Starfighter arcade game, seeing it as a natural tie-in that would capitalize on the movie's expected success. The game was designed to be Atari's first three-dimensional polygonal arcade game using a Motorola 68000 processor, which was cutting-edge technology at the time. The development team included several talented programmers and designers who worked hard to bring the space combat from the film to life, and by the time the movie hit theaters in July of 1984, the game was roughly 75% complete. It would have used the same controller setup as Atari's popular Star Wars arcade game, giving players a familiar way to pilot their own Gunstar through enemy territory. But then reality hit. When Atari executives calculated the final production costs, they realized each arcade cabinet would need to sell for around $10,000, which was an astronomical price for the early 80s. Most arcade games at that time cost between $2,000 and $3,000, so this price tag was genuinely shocking. To make matters worse, The Last Starfighter didn't become the massive blockbuster that everyone had hoped for at the box office. When Atari representatives watched the film during post-production, they made the tough business decision that it wasn't going to be successful enough to justify the expensive cabinet costs, and the plug was pulled on the arcade version even though it was so close to completion. The cancellation didn't just affect the arcade version either. Atari had also been developing home versions of the game for the Atari 2600 and Atari 5200 consoles, plus versions for Atari 8-bit computers. None of these were ever released under the Last Starfighter name, though the home computer version was eventually reworked and released as Star Raiders 2 in 1986. Fact 7. The Star Car predated. Back to the Future. When most people think of iconic gull-wing door cars from 1980s science fiction movies, the DeLorean time machine from Back to the Future immediately comes to mind. But here's something that might surprise you. The Last Starfighter actually beat Back to the Future to theaters by a full year, and it featured its own version of a sleek DeLorean-inspired vehicle called the Star Car. The Last Starfighter premiered on July 13, 1984, while Back to the Future didn't hit theaters until July 3, 1985. This means that audiences actually saw a futuristic flying car with gull-wing doors in The Last Starfighter before Doc Brown ever fired up the flux capacitor. The Star Car was built by legendary custom car designer Gene Winfield, who had previously created vehicles for Blade Runner and other science fiction productions. Winfield deliberately designed the Star Car with gull-wing doors and a stainless steel construction that was clearly inspired by the DeLorean DC-12. In the film, the Star Car serves as the spaceship that alien conman Centauri drives when he arrives at the trailer park to recruit Alex Rogan. The vehicle even has a 1984 California license plate that reads Rylos, the name of the alien planet in the movie. What makes this timeline even more interesting is that the Star Car actually made a cameo appearance in Back to the Future Part 2 during the 2015 future scenes in Hill Valley. If you look closely at the background traffic, you can spot the Star Car among the other futuristic vehicles flying around. The current whereabouts of the original Star Car prop remain a mystery, though rumors suggest it may have been repainted red and is now located somewhere in France. So while the DeLorean became the more famous time-traveling vehicle, the Last Starfighter's Star car actually pioneered the look of gull-wing door spacecraft in 80s cinema a full year earlier. Fact 7. The Star Car predated Back to the Future. When most people think of iconic gull-wing door cars from 1980s science fiction movies, the DeLorean time machine from Back to the Future immediately comes to mind. But here's something that might surprise you. The Last Starfighter actually beat Back to the Future to theaters by a full year, and it featured its own version of a sleek DeLorean-inspired vehicle called the Star Car. The Last Starfighter premiered on July 13, 1984, while Back to the Future didn't hit theaters until July 3, 1985. This means that audiences actually saw a futuristic flying car with gull-wing doors in the Last Starfighter before Doc Brown ever fired up the flux capacitor. The Star Car was built by legendary custom car designer Gene Winfield, who had previously created vehicles for Blade Runner and other science fiction productions. Winfield deliberately designed the Star Car with gull-wing doors and a stainless steel construction that was clearly inspired by the DeLorean DC-12. In the film, the Star Car serves as the spaceship that alien conman Centauri drives when he arrives at the trailer park to recruit Alex Rogan. The vehicle even has a 1984 California license plate that reads Rylos, the name of the alien planet in the movie. What makes this timeline even more interesting is that the Star Car actually made a cameo appearance in Back to the Future Part 2 during the 2015 future scenes in Hill Valley. If you look closely at the background traffic, you can spot the Star Car among the other futuristic vehicles flying around. The current whereabouts of the original Star Car prop remain a mystery, though rumors suggest it may have been repainted red and is now located somewhere in France. So while the DeLorean became the more famous time-traveling vehicle, the Last Starfighter's Star Car actually pioneered the look of gull-wing door spacecraft in 80s cinema a full year earlier. Fact 8. The film was shot in only 38 days. When you watch The Last Starfighter today, it's hard to believe that this ambitious space opera, with its groundbreaking visual effects, was actually filmed in just 38 days. That's barely more than a month to capture all the live-action footage for a movie that would go on to become a cult classic and pioneer the use of computer-generated imagery in Hollywood. To put that in perspective, most major studio films at the time took anywhere from 2 to 4 months to shoot, and some big-budget productions stretched even longer. But director Nick Castle and his crew had to work fast, and they made the tight schedule even more challenging by doing most of their shooting at night. The production set up shop in Canyon Country, a rugged area north of Los Angeles that provided the perfect backdrop for the trailer park setting where teenage hero Alex Rogan lives with his family. Night shoots became the norm rather than the exception, which meant the cast and crew were working through the dark hours while most people were sleeping. This kind of schedule is notoriously exhausting for everyone involved, from the actors who have to stay energized and focused when their bodies want to rest, to the crew members handling lights, cameras, and sound equipment in the darkness. Night filming does have some advantages though, as it's easier to control lighting and there's less ambient noise from traffic or other activities, but it takes a real toll on people after weeks of reversed sleep schedules. The compressed timeline meant that every single day of shooting had to count, with no room for major delays or extended retakes. Castle and his team had to be incredibly organized and efficient, planning each shot carefully and moving quickly from one scene to the next. Despite these constraints, they managed to capture all the performances and live-action sequences that would later be combined with the revolutionary computer graphics created by digital productions. The fact that they pulled off such a polished film in such a short time frame is a testament to the dedication and skill of everyone involved in the production. Fact 9. The composer wanted to beat Star Wars. When composer Craig Safin was brought on board to create the musical score for The Last Starfighter, he didn't just want to make good music for a science fiction film, he wanted to create something that would rival or even surpass the legendary John Williams score from Star Wars. This was an incredibly ambitious goal, considering that Star Wars had set the gold standard for orchestral film music just 7 years earlier in 1977, and its music had become one of the most recognizable soundtracks in cinema history. To achieve this massive sound, Safin decided to use what he called a Mahler-sized orchestra, referring to the enormous orchestras that composer Gustav Mahler was famous for using in his symphonies. What this meant in practical terms was that Safin assembled an orchestra with an unusual breadth of instruments that went far beyond what most film scores required at the time. The orchestra included quadruple woodwinds, meaning 4 times the normal number of flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons that you would typically find in a standard orchestra. Even more impressively, the brass section featured 8 trumpets, 8 trombones, and 8 horns, creating a wall of sound that could fill every moment of the space battles and dramatic scenes with rich, powerful music. This approach was quite expensive and logistically challenging, as coordinating and recording such a large ensemble required significant time and resources. However, Safin felt that the scale of the film's story, with its intergalactic battles, heroic journey, and epic scope, deserved music that could match that grandeur. The resulting score has been praised by fans over the years, with Safin himself performing orchestral suites of the Last Starfighter music in concerts in different countries. Director Nick Castle has spoken fondly of the score in interviews, calling it one of Craig Safin's best works and noting that it holds up remarkably well against all the other space opera soundtracks that have been released before and since. Fact 10. Young Wil Wheaton was cut from the film before Wil Wheaton became famous as Wesley Crusher on Star Trek. The Next Generation, he appeared in The Last Starfighter as a young child actor, but his role ended up being almost completely erased from the final cut. Wheaton was cast as one of Lewis's friends in the trailer park, and he actually had several lines of dialogue that were written into the script and filmed during production. However, when the film went through the editing process, every single one of his spoken lines was removed, leaving him only visible in brief background moments throughout the movie. If you watch the film carefully, you can still spot young Wheaton in several scenes, particularly during moments when kids are playing around the trailer park. He appears most notably in background shots where children are playing ball or hanging out near the Starfighter arcade game, but he never gets to say a word. The credits list him as Louie's friend, which is technically accurate since he's among the group of kids in the neighborhood, but viewers watching the film would have no idea he was supposed to have a speaking role at all. This was particularly unfortunate timing for Wheaton, who was just starting his acting career. He was around 11 or 12 years old during filming in 1983, and landing a role in what was expected to be a major summer science fiction release would have been a significant credit for a young actor. Instead, his performance ended up on the cutting room floor, leaving only these fleeting glimpses of him in the background. The irony is that just a few years later, Wheaton would become a household name among science fiction fans when he joined the cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation. In 1987, playing the teenage genius Wesley Crusher for the show's first 4 seasons and making occasional appearances after that. His brief silent appearance in The Last Starfighter became a curious footnote in his career, a near miss that happened just before his big break in the Star Trek universe. Fact 11. Death Blossom had never been tested. One of the most thrilling moments in The Last Starfighter comes when Alex Rogan and his navigator Grig find themselves surrounded by the entire Kodan fighter fleet with no way out, and they have to activate a weapon called Death Blossom that has literally never been tested before. This wasn't just a throwaway line in the script to create tension, it was actually written into the dialogue in a way that makes the audience genuinely wonder if Alex and Grig are about to accidentally blow themselves up instead of saving the galaxy. When Grig explains that Death Blossom delivers one massive volley at close range, he adds the word "theoretically" at the end, which immediately makes Alex nervous enough to ask what he means by that. Grig admits that the weapon has never actually been tested and that it might overload the ship's systems and cause it to explode, which is about the worst thing you want to hear when you're already facing impossible odds against an entire armada. Alex responds with the perfect line that captures the desperate situation they're in, saying, "What are you worried about, Grig? Theoretically, we should already be dead," which makes Grig shrug and chuckle because he knows Alex is absolutely right about that. The Death Blossom was designed as an experimental prototype weapon that Grig had been working on when the hangar was destroyed, and it's described as a weapon of last resort that spins the ship rapidly while firing all of its weapons in every direction at once. The filmmakers created real tension here because when Alex finally activates it during the climactic battle, the audience has no idea if it will work as intended or if the Gunstar will simply explode from the overload. The weapon does work and destroys all the remaining Kodan fighters in one spectacular display. But then it drains the ship's main power reserves completely, leaving them dead in space until Grig manages to jump-start the reactor using life support power. This entire sequence works so well because the movie took the time to establish that this wasn't some guaranteed solution, but rather a genuine gamble that could have ended in disaster at any moment. Fact 12. The hitchhiker became Gul Dukat. If you blink during The Last Starfighter, you might miss Marc Alaimo's brief appearance as a mysterious hitchhiker who turns out to be a Zandozan alien assassin in disguise. His role in the 1984 film was small but memorable, as he portrayed one of the shape-shifting killers sent to Earth to eliminate Alex Rogan. Alaimo's character appears human at first, but his true alien nature is revealed when he attempts to carry out his deadly mission. The role required him to play both the innocent-looking hitchhiker and the menacing extraterrestrial underneath, giving audiences just a taste of his talent for playing complex villains. What makes this casting particularly fascinating is that Marc Alaimo would go on to become one of the most beloved antagonists in Star Trek history nearly a decade later. In 1993, he was cast as Gul Dukat in Star Trek: Deep Space Nine, a recurring Cardassian character who would appear in 33 episodes throughout the series. Dukat became known as one of the franchise's most nuanced and compelling villains, with Alaimo bringing depth and charisma to a character who could have easily been one-dimensional. The actor himself never saw Dukat as purely evil, choosing instead to play him with sensitivity and complexity, which helped make the character so memorable to fans. Interestingly, The Last Starfighter wasn't Alaimo's first brush with the Star Trek universe either. Before landing his iconic Deep Space Nine role, he had already appeared in Star Trek: The Next Generation, where he played the first Romulan ever shown in that series, Commander Tebok, in the 1988 episode The Neutral Zone. He also played the first Cardassian character in any Star Trek series, Gul Matet, in the 1991 episode The Wounded. These earlier appearances actually helped establish the look of the Cardassian species, as makeup artist Michael Westmore designed the distinctive neck ridges specifically to accentuate Alaimo's naturally long neck and pronounced neck muscles. So in a strange way, that brief hitchhiker role in The Last Starfighter was just the beginning of a career filled with memorable alien antagonists across multiple science fiction franchises. Fact 13. Beta scenes were added after test screenings. When director Nick Castle first screened The Last Starfighter for test audiences in 1984, he discovered something unexpected about his film. While audiences enjoyed the main story about Alex Rogan becoming a space hero, they absolutely loved the scenes featuring Beta Alex, the android duplicate left behind on Earth to cover for the real Alex while he's off fighting aliens. The Beta character, played by Lance Guest in a dual role, was supposed to provide some light comedy relief as he struggled to act human and impersonate Alex convincingly. But test audiences responded so positively to Beta's awkward attempts at being human that Castle made a significant decision to go back and shoot more scenes featuring the character after principal photography had already wrapped. This decision to add more Beta content wasn't just about giving audiences what they wanted, though that was certainly part of it. Castle felt that expanding Beta's storyline added more originality to what might otherwise have been a fairly straightforward hero's journey story. By showing what was happening back on Earth with this comedic android trying to maintain Alex's normal life, the film gained an extra dimension that set it apart from other space adventure movies of the era. The Beta scenes provided a clever counterpoint to the serious space battles happening light years away, and they gave audiences a chance to see Lance Guest showcase his comedic timing alongside his dramatic performance as the real Alex. The additional filming created some production challenges, particularly because Lance Guest had already cut his hair short after initial filming wrapped and had contracted an illness during the reshoot period. This meant he had to wear a wig and heavy makeup for these new Beta scenes, which is actually visible in certain parts of the final film if you know what to look for. Despite these technical difficulties, Castle's instinct to expand Beta's role proved correct, and the android character became one of the most memorable and entertaining aspects of The Last Starfighter, adding humor and heart to the science fiction adventure. Fact 14. King Arthur inspired the entire premise. The entire concept of The Last Starfighter didn't come from science fiction conventions or video game culture, but from medieval literature about a legendary king. Screenwriter Jonathan R. Betuel was wandering through a video arcade one day in the early 1980s when he saw a young boy intensely focused on playing a video game, and that image stuck with him. At the same time, Betuel happened to be reading The Once and Future King by T.H. White, which is a classic retelling of the King Arthur legend. As he watched that kid playing the arcade game, Betuel's imagination connected these two seemingly unrelated things in a fascinating way. He started wondering what would happen if a video game could work like the Sword in the Stone from the Arthur legend. In the original story, only the true King of England could pull the magical sword Excalibur from the stone, proving his worthiness to rule. Betuel imagined a scenario where a video game served the same purpose as that legendary test, except instead of proving someone worthy to be king, it would prove they had the skills to be a starfighter pilot. The idea was that if a player could rack up an incredible high score and beat the game, it would send out a ripple effect across the universe, alerting alien recruiters that they'd found someone with exceptional talent. This Arthur connection wasn't just inspiration that Betuel kept to himself either. He deliberately wove it directly into the movie's dialogue and plot. When Centauri gets into serious trouble for using the Starfighter arcade game to recruit pilots from Earth, which is against Star League law, the other characters specifically refer to his recruiting method as the Excalibur test. That name is a direct reference to King Arthur's legendary sword, making the connection between ancient legend and futuristic warfare completely explicit. The film essentially modernized a 1,000-year-old story about proving one's worth through a mystical test, just replacing a magical sword stuck in stone with a challenging arcade game in a trailer park. Fact 15. It cost $2,000 per second for CGI. When The Last Starfighter was being made in 1983 and 1984, the visual effects team at Digital Productions was pushing the absolute limits of what computer technology could do, and the price tag reflected just how experimental and expensive this groundbreaking work really was. The total cost for creating the computer-generated imagery in the film came to over $2 million, which might not sound astronomical by today's blockbuster standards, but when you break down what that money actually paid for, the numbers become truly staggering. Digital Productions created 27 minutes of computer-generated effects for the movie, and when you divide that $2 million budget by the amount of screen time it produced, you end up with a cost of approximately $2,000 for every single second of finished CGI that appeared on screen. To put this in perspective, each individual frame of animation in those space battle sequences had to be painstakingly calculated and rendered by the Cray XMP supercomputer. And this process was so computationally intensive that it could take anywhere from several minutes to over 2 hours just to render a single frame, depending on its complexity. The most complicated shot in the entire film was the scene showing the Gunstar flight bay filled with multiple spacecraft, which contained a staggering 4 million polygons and represented the most complex computer-generated sequence that had ever been created up to that point in cinema history. When you consider that film runs at 24 frames per second and each frame required this level of computational power and time to produce, it becomes clear why the costs were so extraordinarily high. The production company estimated that using computer animation actually required only about half the time and somewhere between 1/3 to 1/2 the cost of traditional special effects methods like models and miniatures, which means that if they had gone the conventional route, the budget for effects could have easily doubled or tripled. Even with these cost savings, the financial gamble that digital productions and the filmmakers took on this cutting-edge technology was enormous, especially considering that the film's total budget was only $15 million, meaning that the visual effects alone consumed more than 13% of the entire production budget.